In this video, we're going to take you through how you can assess a little bit of troubleshooting and where it might be coming from. Now, it's most common that when people get problems with the gas output, it's coming from something outside of the machine. So it could be, for example, there's something going on with the connection between the gas output in this tube into the humidification bottle. It could be there's something damaged or not quite right with the bottle itself. There could be something going on with the tubing, or it could be with this connector here, the Y connector, or it could be with the water stone. So the water stone is most commonly the problem, and then it would be the humidification bottle, and then it would be everything else. And very rarely do we find it's a problem with the machine itself. So what I've done here is I have switched the machine on and attached the water stone, so it's coming through the Y adapter here. So we've got oxygen and hydrogen going into the water. But what you'll notice is this humidifier bottle is bubbling and this one isn't. And if that's the case, and it's quite a common problem, the most common reason for that is that the cap on the top of the machine, which is up here, is not tight enough. So if I just tighten that, what you should see in a moment is the bubbling in this humidifier bottle should start to bubble. And it can take about a minute for that to happen. And there it is. So we've now got bubbling in both bottles, and that means that we've got full oxygen and hydrogen output. So in this particular issue, the problem wasn't in any of this external apparatus. It was coming from the machine itself, and it was coming from the fact that the lid, the cap, wasn't properly tight on the water tank at the top of the machine. So if you've tightened that cap up and everything is working, then the way that you can assess that everything is working is you should have bubbling in both of these, and you should have strong output into the water stone. This is the best way of checking that everything is working. So if we go through the first of the checks, if for some reason the machine is on and you're not getting the bubbling into the water through the water stone, and you just want to check, is the water stone the actual problem? You can start by just detaching the water stone, and I'll put that out of the way, and then you can switch the machine on and see if just putting this tube into the water creates any bubbling. And if there's bubbling when you put the tube in, but it's not when you put the stone on, then you can identify that the problem is with the stone. And then what we might need to do is identify whether it's the stone part or this tube part here. Now there is a valve in the tube part that can get a little bit sticky, and one of the things that you can do is unscrew the head part, and I don't advise anyone to touch that with their actual hands and fingers, because the oil in your hands and fingers can actually start to contaminate but also create blockages in the pores. So we would say get some kind of kitchen towel or something and use that as a way of unscrewing. And what you can try to do is blow through the tube. And you should be able to blow this way, but not the other way, because it's a one-way valve. And if you find that you can blow into this and there's too much resistance and there's not a flow of air going through it, then there might be a blockage. But what you can also do then is you can attach this back to here, and actually without the water stone attached, you can then see if that bit works. So what we have is the ability to see, does the oxygen and the hydrogen come out just through the tubing? And if it does, we know it's the water stone. We can then just attach the tube bit and put it in while the machine is running. If the oxygen and the hydrogen is coming into the water and it's bubbling, then we know that's okay. And if it isn't, we can try blowing through it to see if we can actually unstick it a little bit, or whether it's just stuck and blocked. And then what we can do is, if it then is working and we put the stone back on and then it's not working, we've identified the problem as being the stone part. And then we can either replace, or there's some techniques to try and resolve that. So the next thing we want to assess is there a problem with one of the bottles? So one of the simplest things that you can do is, if there was a problem and it wasn't bubbling, even after you had tightened up the cap, one of these isn't bubbling, you could swap them around. So you could take those out and unclip, swap them around, and then plug them back into the outputs. And what should happen is, just say there was a problem and this one wasn't bubbling. If you swap them around, and now that it's attached to the opposite one, it's still not bubbling, then you can identify that's the bottle that's the problem. If it's on this side, regardless of which bottle, then there's something else going on. But we can then identify whether it's the bottle by swapping them around. If there's a problem with the bottle, we can actually take a look at it and just detach it from the tubing. And it's very rare there's a problem with this connector. This is very thick. It's unlikely to get clogged. It's unlikely to get damaged because it's not really kind of getting in the way of anything where it could be damaged in any way. But the most common thing that will go wrong and cause a problem is if the water isn't filled to the correct height. That's the most common thing. So if the water's too low or too high, then that's the first thing to check. The other thing is if it's not sealed correctly. Now, these bottles are very well designed that they don't have to be super tight, but if you give it an extra little bit of a tighten, that could also solve the problem for some people. And if you unscrew it, it is possible that inside the bottle, this bit of tubing here could have become detached from the connector. So if I just pull this out, there you go. So what I've done now is I've detached this tubing from the connection on the inside, and that could sometimes be the problem. So all you can do is just line it up, make sure it fits on nice and strongly, and it might be you need to take this bit off completely in order to do it. So I'm just going to push that firmly on. There you go. And then we can put this bit on and then just push it right up to the top. And so really that's the only thing that could have become detached. And if you then look closely at where this screws onto, there is actually a very fine rubber seal which can actually be taken off, and we don't recommend that you do that, but it just means that if for any reason that becomes damaged or is lost in some cases, it might mean that when you're screwing this on, it doesn't create a nice seal. So any kind of place where the gas can escape will affect the pressure. So with this, the key thing is make sure it's tightened, make sure the seal is still there, make sure that internal connection is connected, and then make sure the water is filled to the correct height. And if there's still a problem, then the only thing we could do is send you a new bottle and see if that corrects the problem, because sometimes there might be something that's damaged that we can't check or even know about, and sometimes just a replacement might be the way to address that. So when it comes to also checking if the bottle is the problem, once you've done all your checks, if it's still not working, you could try leaving the bottle out and just plugging it straight into the output, and you could do that for both sides, but if you've got one bottle that isn't quite working and it's not bubbling, you can try plugging it into that output, and then again, either attaching your stone or just using the tubing into the water, you could see if it's working that way. And what you can also do is just take one bit of tubing and just work with one bit of tubing straight into the water. And then you could add the water stone and see if that works as well. And if everything is working with this out of the way, then you know that this bottle must be the problem. So at the moment, if we've got hydrogen, or in this case it's oxygen, coming straight out into the stone and that starts to bubble, then we know there's nothing wrong with the stone and there's nothing wrong with that bit of tubing. And you could then check all of your tubing. So I could take this bit of tubing out and I could replace it with the other bits of tubing just to see if there's one bit of tubing that when you attach it directly to the machine, all of a sudden it might not be working. And it might be that there is either a leak somewhere, there could be a bit of damage, but all it requires is the tubing to have an imperfection in it. And one of the things that people have said to us is quite often, depending on where they have their machine stored, it might be that it's on the floor and these bits of tubing are basically maybe on the floor, and it might be that occasionally things are resting on the tubing or someone has stood on it and it's created an imperfection. Or it could be that they're storing the tubing where they're actually having it kind of like that, where it's got this kink in it, and that can create over time a weakness and an imperfection in the smoothness of the internal tubing, which means that as the gas goes through, it actually creates a rough edge, and that can really impact on how the flow of gas comes through into the water stone and through that tubing. So really make sure you don't store these with tight things which pinch, because that will over time damage the tubing. But this is a way that you can just check that the tubing is okay and that the output from the machine is okay. So if you were to work with this, and it doesn't matter which tubing you use, nothing's coming out, then you know the chances are that there's something more internal. So you can give that a try, but if everything's coming through the tubing okay, but then when you put this back into place, it stops working, the gas output is reduced or it's not coming through at all, then you know that the problem is here somewhere. So being able to eliminate the bottle as a problem is very helpful. Another thing that you can do is use a piece of tubing attached directly to either the oxygen, and then you can do the same for the hydrogen, and just test straight into the water. And then you can test the other bit of tubing, just one straight into the water. And so if that side is working and that side isn't, but when you remove the water bottle and plug it straight in, it was, again, you're identifying where in the system the problem is. And the last thing that can go wrong is this connector, this Y connector here. Now, it's very rare that this connector goes wrong, but we have had instances where people have left all of this on the floor and someone's trod on it, and maybe there's been a crack. So we've had one occasion where we've sent out a replacement and that solved the problem. So one of the things that you can do is, as I said, if you take the Y connector out of the equation by testing each output one at a time and they're okay, and then you put the connector in, and you can either put that in directly or you can add in your extra bit of tubing, and then there's a problem, then you've probably limited it down to the Y connector. So it's just a process of elimination. Now, in some cases, when we can't figure out the problem, it just seems to be a bit of a mystery, we sometimes, if we ever needed to, can just replace the whole of this external set, and hopefully that usually solves the problem, because sometimes it's just a mystery we can't solve.